Good evening. My name is Mariko. I'm the Director of Philanthropy at Honolulu Civil Beat. We're so happy to share this evening with you for tonight's discussion, Disaster Preparedness and Food System Resilience in Hawaii. This Future of Food and Agriculture in Hawaii series is a joint project with Honolulu Civil Beat, the Hawaiʻi Institute for Sustainable Community Food Systems at the University of Hawaiʻi, West Oʻahu, the UH Better Tomorrow Speaker Series, and Waiwai Collective. We are grateful to the funders who help support this series, W.K. Kellogg Foundation, the Hawaii Community Foundation, Kamehameha Schools, the Queen's Health Systems, and the Ulu Pono Fund at Hawaii Community Foundation. This series aims to generate new opportunities for community dialogue and facilitate the development of a common understanding, vision, and plan of action for achieving health, equity, resilience, and sustainability in food systems of Hawaii. Hosting tonight's discussion is my colleague and Civil Beat Hawaii-grown reporter, Thomas Heaton. Here you go.
Aloha kākou. Thank you so much, everyone, for being here. It's really an honor to be mediating this very important conversation with our three esteemed guests. I'll keep it short, but I have a little intro for the discussion tonight. Extreme weather, of course, has been a consistent theme of summer in 2023. It was the hottest summer on record for the Northern Hemisphere. That brought with it ocean storms, hurricanes, flooding, fire, and drought across the world, and that has had disastrous effects. Of course, we had our own disaster on August 8. The fires on Big Island, the blazes on central Maui, and of course the conflagration that razed Lahaina. It's fair to say everyone across the state has been hurting, and especially on Maui. But it has laid bare the clear and evident need to urgently prepare for future climate-induced events and the shocks they will introduce and induce on Hawaii's infrastructure, commodity and food chains, local agriculture, and communities. Tonight, with Dexter Kishida, Chad Buck, and Jennifer Walters, we'll look into what happened in the response to Lahaina. We'll also reflect on what we knew before August 8 about the state's key vulnerabilities in its food system and the lessons that we've learnt in the wake of that wildfire, so we can better prepare our communities, agencies, the private sector and government entities for the future as the climate continues to change. The point of this conversation is to think about how to reduce the harmful impacts of the inevitable disasters we face here in Hawaii, which we know are only going to increase in severity and frequency. So I will stop talking so much and let the people that you came here to listen to speak. But first of all, I'd like to ask them to describe their roles and the role that their agencies or firms took in the Lahaina disaster and the wake of. Please, Dexter.
Evening. Dexter Kishida, the Deputy to the Chairperson at the Hawaii Department of Agriculture. And our role really stepped in a few areas. One, in natural resources. We do a lot of helping to not let invasive species move around. The other piece that we do, specifically on both Maui and Hawaii Island, we're working with the farmers and ranchers that were affected, displaced animals, helping to get foster homes and feed for them because the grasses were burned.
Chad Buck, owner of Hawaii Foodservice Alliance, HFA Logistics. Our role for the state and Maui County EOC during the disaster in Maui and the wildfires was this: we were the state's and county's platform, logistics platform, to run aid into Maui, into Lahaina, and throughout, including into Kula, as early as August 9th as we were driving in and Lahaina was still burning.
Hi, good evening. My name is Jennifer Walter. I'm the Deputy Director at the City and County of Honolulu's Emergency Management Agency, Department of Emergency Management. Our role in this was really to provide mutual aid, which is where we're sending our county's resources here from Oʻahu over to Maui County to assist. So it was everything from our firefighters to our medical examiner. A couple of our EOC personnel, myself included, went over for about a week. So it was really about supporting the other counties' response, and now kind of looking at what do we learn from this situation and take back to our own county for our own planning.
Thank you. Before the August 8 fires and the devastation of Lahaina, what did we already know about Hawaii's, frankly, lacking level of preparedness for such disasters, whether it be fire or flooding or hurricanes? And Chad, would you like to?
Sure. I think if you're paying attention to this subject, you probably know the three of us from back during COVID when we did Ketchup and M&Ms, and we talked about the state's complete lack of preparedness, the state's inability to move anything in the case of emergency into the areas of need. And so we started highlighting this, and so we kind of bonded through that, and then as recently as 7 weeks before, to the day before the fires in Lahaina, I released with KITV, co-produced the Kuleana series, Preparing for Disaster in the Age of Climate Change and Sea Rise. Part of that was coming out of Ketchup and M&Ms, coming out of COVID, seeing that the legislative session up until that point made zero progress in addressing any of the things that were brought up in a very broadly cast and viewed documentary from Green Island Films. We felt like we needed to put this together and come at it again, and that was through Albie's great work with, I believe, the Kellogg Foundation regarding the survey of households that say they're prepared and at least have a 2-week supply. And so we were trying to add all that in and then come back at this through that. And so we knew pretty clearly and talked about it at length that we are not prepared, and that showed proof positive on August 8th.
So, of course, how can you were there, you know, your staff were there on the ground. How did that play out? How would you describe that all playing out, that lacking preparedness playing out in the case of August 8 and Lahaina?
So the night of August 8th, when I think Maui County was trying to figure out and just get their heads around, because fires were blazing through Kula, skipping through, you know, hundreds of acres of in Kula, and then Lahaina's going through, and there's just, I was on have been for a while on a short text string with the governor and a series of directors, and so we're just trying to get information, and then very early in the morning, as I think it was Hawaiian Air was coming across, and some people took some pictures, because it was everybody at Maui County was absolutely involved and engulfed in that emergency. Nobody was running around saying, hey, I got some news for this, or I want a press release for that. This was everybody hands on deck, firefighters, 3 engines down in the fire. All this stuff is going on. No, it's hard to get communication when you're just trying to escape an inferno. And we saw the pictures on what was taken from a Hawaiian Air's flight. That came through the text string. The governor calls early in the morning and says, we need to get aid as soon as possible, whatever it takes. If anybody stands in your way, call my cell, text this string. He set up a text thread of himself, Brian Schatz, General Hara, James Barrows from Haima, and several other people on that thread, that if something happens, we could actually break the log jam, do whatever needs to be done to move into theater. And then he called Mayor Bisson. We were on communicating together with Mayor Bisson, who then Mayor Bisson immediately moved me to the EOC and embedded us with Lox Abraham, Cynthia Lalo, and Kaiea Medeiros. And from that time, it was absolutely clear that Haima, Maui County, no one at the state level, no one at the federal level. We saw FEMA on day 10 with clipboards. So nobody was prepared to do this. We've been talking about this for years now, and so it wasn't a surprise. And so we knew that, we were, I think I described it as unleashed to go and do whatever needed to be done in that area. And so lastly, the first week was absolute chaos. There's no cell, there's a blockade, there's no power, there's no wireless, all this stuff is going on, and that blockade was, set there for good reason. But it was that period of time that was the most crucial in my view, because nobody knew what was coming, and that aid needed to get there, because if you think you have problems, day one, try not eating for day 1 or 2, and then see what happens with the behavior. And so there was a tremendous amount of urgency to get aid as quickly as possible.
I'm wondering if you might be able to describe that kind of chain of command. Jennifer, Dexter, your experience with the county as well. How does that really work? I mean, Chad's spoken to the governor rallying with Schatz and himself. How does that kind of work? Can you speak to that, please?
Yeah, I think that's something that it looks really messy from the outside and sometimes from the inside about who's in charge. And I think that that's probably not well understood, and that really between the local government, the state government, and the federal government, there's really not that the state comes in and takes over or the feds come in and take over. Really, all disasters begin and end locally, and the local elected official, the mayor, has overall responsibility for that disaster. And then when they need those state resources or federal resources, those are coming in to provide coordination and support. So really, it's not command and control between local and state and federal, it's coordination and support. And that's tricky, right? Because you have different people trying to do what they think's best, and they can't always control a lot of the resources or the things that need to happen because only this little piece is theirs. Yet they get dinged for it in the media or somewhere else. And to the public, I think that a well-functioning system isn't so much that everybody understands, oh, give them a break, that was on FEMA or that one was on the state, is that it looks seamless to everybody. And I think when the system's working, it's not so much that you have a clear picture in your head, oh, that's the guy, that's the decision maker. It's really, you see all levels of government moving in the same direction, in sync, and not pointing fingers, things like that. So it's complicated. People have different authorities, jurisdictions, but really it's about coordination and support during an event.
I was in a meeting this morning on Maui, and I think it was said really well that it's that the whole recovery is community-led with government support, and that's really the role like the Department of Ag plays. What does the community want and need, and let's figure out how to get those resources.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about like the firefighter fighting the fire, right? Like, you don't want someone like me who's never fought a fire in my life sitting in an EOC telling that fire chief on the ground what to do. We're supporting them. So if they need a shelter, if they need to do alert and warning, it really has to be driven by the experts in the field. And like it was just said, the experts in the field about how the recovery should go are the people of Maui. And that's kind of how it should work. Needs, requests should bubble up and be taken care of. And at each level of government, we lean back to the next big guy behind us when we can't meet those needs.
Coming back to food security in light of these events and the direct wake of events such as these, can any of you tell me what some of the key weaknesses were and some of the lessons that could be learned going forward in terms of being prepared, making sure that there is food there and water and everything that is needed post-disaster? What are some of the points, the sore points that you felt in the wake of Lahaina, and what are some of the points going forward that you were going to take as lessons for the future, whether they were successes or shortcomings?
So we've always advocated that that the state and county would work together to have stockpiles of emergency supplies, medical, water, shelf-stable food, etc. And that's never happened. And so the result of that for Lahaina is we immediately emptied as much stock as we could from our own warehouses and put that in the loads going in morning of. And we then called Costco Maui, who allowed us to buy full container loads before they ever hit the store. We need containers of water, we need, the different products, we need those. They allowed us to buy those, and with just a phone call, because we're their largest supplier, and so they called and released those. That wasn't enough on an island when this is going on, and so our staff was calling and working with Costco's buyer at Hawaii Kai, and we were pulling from Hawaii Kai, Iwalei, Waipio, Kapolei, Kauai, Kona, and just rallying whatever we could, and then also diverting containers that we had on the water coming in, and so we could release this product. And then if it couldn't get there fast enough, we were moving it via our air freight logistics side, and it took a full statewide blitz to start moving enough product to and resources into Lahaina. So it was, again, ideally you would be sitting on some stockpiles that you could start moving in, and just in a controlled way, and it wasn't this panic outreach across all islands. And again, we were the only company doing it. Everybody, the whole thing was blockaded. I should say what's worth noting, and which makes Hawaii different, when you talk to FEMA and you talk to the people that do this for a living, what makes Hawaii different was absolutely the kako, the people that came together, the community that rallied at War Memorial Field, and the talking about this is highly emotional, because one of the most moving scenes was coming back into Wailuku, and there was hundreds of volunteers standing in War Memorial, cars coming up, people donating case after case of water, of tuna, of chicken, of different clothes and different things and supplies that were diapers, formula for keiki, etc. And they're rallying and working together, and they're palletizing. We're dropping off pallets, and we're loading what's coming from the community, and that bridged the gap between what we could get in an organized way versus the community and the power of kako coming together and feeding into those logistics that would then convoy from War Memorial through Lahaina, with MPD escorting us and just blowing and going through. And so it was if the state had systems in place, stockpiles in place for an island chain nation 2,500 miles away from everywhere, it'd be a great start to actually taking climate change and sea rise seriously.
That naturally leads me to a question for all three of you. I guess you've all probably worked alongside Chad and Albie in terms of these pre-recovery pods. I'm wondering if you could tell me what they are. You could tell us all what they are, what pre-recovery pods are, and what's been said about these pre-recovery pods, what work you've done, Chad, and what research there is in terms of key placement of these pre-recovery pods for communities such as Lahaina, which are at risk?
So based on everything that we were learning early in COVID, we've felt like, and I think, out of everybody that works at HAIMA, Civil Defense, Department of Emergency Management, Maui Emergency Management, Jennifer is the most outspoken. Whenever we have a meeting, in a really, really good way. Whenever we have, yeah, if you ask her colleagues, they're like, oh, she's a little wild. But whenever there's a meeting like that, we immediately sit together because, and I think the last meeting we were at together was at Diamond Head. We sat together, and I leaned over, you were to my right, and I said, have they done anything since the last time we sat in a meeting like this? And Jennifer said, no. So I opened that conversation with, I feel like I've been in that Get Smart dome of silence where I'm talking and so on. So anyways, part of what happened with the Precovery Pod is this was kind of an obvious thing to do. Put shelf-stable, 25-year shelf life product, food supplies in an ocean container, put a key on it, and put a lock on it, and break glass in case of emergency. We put the first one in Waianae thanks to Alicia and her amazing work there. And she allowed us to do that at Waianae Comp. And basically, there's so many communities across the state, across the islands, that are geographically predisposed to being cut off from a natural disaster, that if you can't run supplies to that community, again, I think it was Lenin, any society, any civilization is three missed meals away from chaos. If you can't feed that community and calm that community down, you're going to have an entirely different behavior happening in that community. So we proposed this idea, drew this idea up on paper and so on, and kind of presented it, and everybody kind of yawned. And so we bought a container, called the buyer from Sam's Club, and said, I need, so many to make 130,000 meals or meal packets to go in a container. That happened very quickly, and then Solomon Enos came and painted a beautiful mural on there, and we just put the keys on, had a little ceremony, and went, that's what it should look like. In answer to your question, what's happened there, Jennifer's working on some now for Honolulu County directly. Naval Postgraduate School came in and started looking at this, and so they started working and interfacing with us and interfacing with HAIMA and others in Department of Emergency Management to start, and they did a kind of a drawing of what needs to go where, and part of that motivation, and I get it, is you've got the military bases all around, and if the communities around military bases are not getting fed, they're coming over the fence. And so kind of makes sense. And so they started being active in drawing this out, and they continue to want to be active in how we plan this and how we move forward.
Can you address that, please, Jennifer?
Sorry, what was that?
Can you perhaps expand on what Chad was saying about
Yeah.
the work? What specific areas? How are you prioritizing?
Yeah, so we're doing a limited expansion, and really our limiter is funding more than anything else. But I want to create expectation for what we're going to do. One of my concerns, and emergency management isn't about government. There's this concept, I don't like the phrase, it's called whole of community, but the idea is that to really do emergency management or disaster response well, it's got to be everyone working together, that the individual person's prepared, that the government people that don't know private sector logistics have those relationships, and that the community is able to organize, and that we're there to support. And that's got to be the vision, because if you're waiting on us to do stuff, and not taking the initiative for yourself and your family, I just want to preface that's the mistake. And so I feel very passionately that our role needs to be finding the Chads of the world and finding the partners out in the community that serve people every day and have the connections to do a distribution site quickly, and to make that not for here, reactive that people have to invent just in time. We need to do a better job where we're ready to go. Because I feel like if people who had the ability to prepare themselves, who invested in that, who made the family plan, did that, we would be left with making sure we're taking care of the most vulnerable citizens who can't do that. And that's how we're looking at the Recovery Pod. It's not just the geographic isolation, it's food insecurity. FEMA stores some MREs on island and has to recycle them every once in a while, and this came out when they were given away to people who are food insecure for the idea that they would have something for hurricane season. And on the way home, someone driving out saw someone eating the MRE as they were walking down the road because their emergency was today. And so the idea was that rather than try to tell people who are food insecure every day to prepare for 14 days, what do we do for them? And so we're partnering with our really strong partners at the food bank to say who runs food distribution programs every day in communities that are geographically isolated. So if something happens, it's not that we're opening these up for the public, that they can quickly surge additional food to the people they serve every day that we know are food insecure. So that's our initial focus. We have enough. We're going to be doing one on the North Shore. We'll be doing one in Windward. We filled up the remaining one in Waianae. And then we have one more that we can do with the funding that we have. But I think this is with Chad's leadership, and we're kind of we have a really good system with the food bank to go forward in their partnership. I think this is something that could grow exponentially with more resource. We're kind of constrained. But part of the reason we wanted a partner for us is efficiency. We can't, we're a very small agency, only about 15 people. We can't be on the phone telling every community group, open up your pod, it's time, something bad's happening. By having a group that already has that network, we've just expanded our reach a whole bunch. And so I think this has the potential to really grow beyond that, but that's kind of how we're looking at it right now.
And what I'm hearing Jennifer's challenge to everyone is that we've got to take some pieces off the board in an emergency. So if you're a homeowners association, let's say, and you can spare a parking stall to put a container in for your condo, and your condo can all chip in to put a container together, do it. Let us know so we know that this piece is off the board. Or if here, where we have a bunch of UH students that probably don't have food storage in their dorm room, do we have a container nearby that businesses and community members can help support to do? Let us know so the coordination can still happen. But we definitely need that. And when I was at the city just a few months ago, that was an important piece because government just doesn't have enough funds to fill enough containers to feed just the vulnerable population in an emergency, not to mention those that are just ill prepared.
I'll just top that off with what our real life experience was in Maui. Is we did the study and it was roughly 10-12% of homes say that they have a 2-week supply of food. My comment to that, of that 10%, 90% of those are lying. Or the behavior is this way. All hell's breaking loose. You don't have power, you don't have wireless. You know that a fire went through and killed and burned close to 2,000 plus structures. Are you going to rely on to go, hey, I think this 2 weeks is good? And you're looking at your kids and your wife or your husband and you're trying, what should we do, honey? And you're not going, yeah, this 2 weeks is great. You show up in line. And thank God there is a line, because if there isn't a line, again, it turns into a whole nother world of hurt. And so, and again, and I keep harping on this, but if the point is if there's not something immediate, everything changes. All the rules change. All the behavior changes. And so that's why it's so important to do this. But it's the responsibility to take care of your own family and do that was absolutely crystal clear in Lahaina.
So the message is pretty clear. This is a shared responsibility, shared kuleana. So what is happening to promote this, to really get this out there? I know, Chad, you've done Ketchup and M&Ms, you did your stuff this year with KITV. From the state side, county side, what's being done to really push this need for emergency preparedness and kind of owning the responsibility on a household level and a community level?
I'll just jump on this real quick, because prior to the Lahaina fire, because of Kuleana, Governor Green was going to hold a summit with other private industry groups besides us. So the Cisco's, the Hatas, the Safeways, the Foodlands, anybody that handles food, et cetera, that could work together and have that. We're to schedule that. I was to chair that. And coming in, that we scheduled that after Kuleana, I think it was in July, and so we're going to hold this in September. Governor Green has been absolutely behind this and pushing to make this happen and make this a reality. And it sounds like I'm bashing everybody. I'm not. We're moving in that direction, and that got sidetracked by Maui. And I'm sure Dexter and Jen have other comments.
So, we do, we have a website, we do a lot of community presentations, we partner with, Chad to push stuff out on television. But it was really clear after they did that survey that we're missing something, because the gap between where we need to be and where people say they are, and even there was a really high number, I forget what it was, of people who didn't even know 14 days was the target. And I think part of the issue is when we go to these disaster fairs, which are great, you're reaching the people that already kind of have an interest and an awareness of that this is a need of something for me to think about. And I think it's almost a question, why aren't you listening? For all of you guys, a little bit of what's the message? Understanding that there's barriers to space, there's barriers financially. But I think one of the things I feel like we need to move towards is how do we expand our reach? And again, I'll kind of go back to partnerships. We do a lot of work with another group called Partners in Care, who helps us reach out to the homeless community when there's an event. They will send out their outreach workers, let people know on the beaches. And so we're going to do a presentation at one of their conferences to talk to all the people that do that and educate them, who then become force multipliers to do education. I think one of the things we haven't capitalized on COVID is we saw how much outreach needed to be done into communities and be done by people that knew that community and were part of it. And I think our outreach programs need to evolve to figure out how to expand and maybe do some kind of peer-to-peer delivery on a regular basis, that maybe it's part-time staff, maybe it's some other program, maybe it's partnering with community groups that already work in that area. But I think we need to go back a little bit to what worked in COVID and how we quickly kind of expanded our reach and understood those networks, because I think we're too passive in some ways and need to figure out how to really get in front of people, but not just us, but the people listen to in their communities.
Just a few other things is that I think the other thing that Governor has been really working with us on in the departments is building the infrastructure that's needed to just build supply, right? Department of Ag traditionally doesn't actually work in emergency food a lot, but we should be building the strength of the baseline so that in an emergency there is supply, there are structures like feed mills, et cetera, that are already online, and hopefully duplicates of them, so we are resilient, that we can have stuff here and not worry about a 10-day shipment, et cetera. And so working on those key pieces is also really essential while we do these messages. And I met Alicia Higa at the Waiwai Comp talking in front of a bunch of finance people. Why was I, and back then I was in the Department of Education in school food, why was I even there? It was the genius of my former director at the city that invited DOE to be part of this conversation with the Federal Reserve and a bunch of other folks that made this crazy connection with a crazy community group that was willing to host food trucks during the summer to take food to keiki out in the beaches, in the parks, etc. And so it's those weird invitations that always work out so well, because quite honestly, you're the choir. You've heard this message many times. How do we get in front of everyone else?
Thank you, Dexter. I'm actually wondering if you could perhaps explore with us a little bit more about the future of the Department of Agriculture, considering it has had a history really of focusing on just purely agriculture. And, you know, we've had many agricultural regimes here in Hawaii, and we're kind of at a crossroads now. And of course, we have the change in climate and these disasters that are becoming an inevitability. So how do you envision the Department of Agriculture playing a role within this entire conversation about disaster resilience, and not just talking about, you know, making sure that the animals have feed and that we have replacement seed for people, but making sure that the agricultural system is strong enough to really withstand this kind of stuff and also feed people in such instances and relieve the burden on private industry such as Chad, who are really driving a lot of this kind of relief.
Sure. That's a big chunk. I'm going to try and bite-size this a little bit. But actually, that's probably the best picture of what the Department of Agriculture has been dealing with for decades, is this immense system that they need to support with, I don't know, $25 million budget. I mean, it's absolutely absurd, right? And so how do you fix this? Well, one, have a governor that's really willing to fix it, and two, an administrator, the chairperson, that's willing to think a little differently on things. And so looking at not only how we can continue doing the usual regulation or even marketing development support, but how do we now bridge these things? How do we cross silos just within our department to better streamline some of the things? So for example, in Maui, it really made the realization that our loan department might need to rethink how we do loans. That before it's market-based, so depending on where prime rate is, really our farmers still somewhat tied to that. Versus if we take it off of prime rate and do a 0, 1, 2, 3, 4%, depending on what kind of loan you get, this could now be beneficial for a farmer. One, they know what they can rely on, and two, it's going to be, at least right now, it's going to be significantly below market rate, especially at a 0, 1% for emergencies, right? So thinking that way, but also looking at, even in the midst of Maui, this is still a pretty good time. And we have the time now to think, how do we build these resilience pieces? And so I was saying, right, too big if we look at the whole thing. Can we look at, and maybe start part of my background coming from DOE is looking at the school system, what they buy, feed 100,000 meals a day. What is that? Because that's the usual stuff that people eat. Like maybe you buy turmeric a lot, but not that much. And in an emergency, that's probably not going to be your major food source. It might be. I apologize. It might be. But usually people eat the cucumbers, lettuce stuff. And that's what is normal for us. So how do we incentivize farmers to feed our kids in the good times so that we can pivot or even ramp up production during the not so good times? And so does that mean that we do create solid seed banks and seed germplasm? That's a horrible word, I know, but that stuff, the starters that can feed into the system to incentivize farmers to do and help, quite frankly, become competitive with the import to get product to schools where there's kind of this solid market, but we can also pivot as needed when Jennifer's like, okay, we need to be ready, there's an emergency coming. But also the power of seed banking, I learned Puerto Rico, Philippines, and a few other places that experienced significant typhoon or hurricane damage, is that how much seed do we have on island? Great question. And so ensuring that we have that starter will relieve also that time frame for our farmers from having to ship in product, which is also getting squeezed out because do we do toilet paper or seed? That's a hard question. And so having that supply here is what's really needed. The 2,500 miles is quite intimidating. And then looking on the back, or actually middle of the page, is these reinforced aggregation centers. So food hubs, probably a good name for that, but a reinforced aggregation center that's regional, that can act in a hub and spoke model that masters of logistics can help us plan out, and that can also be tapped into as a resource through the food banks, but essentially from our emergency departments.
Thank you, Dexter. I guess we're kind of running a little bit short on time, so I'm going to skip forward a little bit. Sorry, guys. I just want to ask, coming out of this tragedy, I'm just wondering if each of you could share what your key recommendations would be to everyone here in terms of any messages that they need to take to their representatives or anyone in the state in terms of things that they should want to prioritize in terms of obviously this massive upheaval that we've faced in the wake of Lahaina. What message would you want to share with them?
Shall I start? Sure. Maybe I'm going to share two. One, it's going to be a really long process, and there's a lot of energy in the beginning, but we're going to need a lot of energy for the next few years in support, financial support, physical support, emotional support for our community. But also, this is the perfect time to just look at the myself, and ensure that we're as ready as we can be. I don't think anybody would be ready for what happened in Lahaina, but if you're the next door neighbor, can you be ready to help that neighbor that was just affected?
I'll kind of speak in generalities, but what I've seen a lot is, we have a really big event, and then there's a lot of attention for a period of time, and maybe some money, and then 5 years from now, it's kind of like the program that, oh yeah, didn't we do that once? Isn't there a container of supplies somewhere? Like it is really a lot easier if we invested in prevention and mitigation and readiness than it is to rebuild an entire town or what it may be after we have a hurricane. And if you look at what's kind of invested in that work, it's pretty minimal because, I think there's so many competing things, and we deal with the emergency in front of us. And if we're really going to get out of this has to stop being we only think about it and invest in it when it's the emergency in front of us. So while I welcome the attention and the new ideas, I'm very concerned that in 18 months from now that's going to trail off, and what was a great program isn't going to have the funding behind it. So I really look at ask people to keep this at the forefront and to really make sure that we're kind of trying to foster a culture of preparedness and to think holistically and not a magic bullet. There's all sorts of things that are challenges. There is not one thing that's going to fix it, but it's a series of things that together are going to make it better. And so I think I welcome the dialogue of what those are and what we can invest in, but I worry about the attention and the focus. And that's the thing I would, if you could help advocate.
Joining what Jennifer said, we walked through COVID and we thought for the first time our legislators have enough will or steel in their spine to actually make a hard decision and tell people Tuesday night, everybody out during COVID, go back to wherever you came from, we need to hunker down. And so that brought hope that we could make hard decisions. And then as predicted, COVID kind of gets in the rearview mirror, people start to forget, the next session of the ledge starts, and near nothing's done. I think if what needs to happen most of all is to keep your representative and your senator on notice and accountable, because every problem we have in this state, unlike if you walk through the Capitol, there's a lot of nicely dressed senators and lawmakers feeling pretty good about themselves. My view of the Capitol is somewhat different. Every problem we face today in Hawaii is at their feet. It was either ignored or it was created at the Capitol. We've done a great job of taking care of the global elite to come here on vacation, and we've done a horrible job of taking care of our own. So keeping the lawmakers accountable, when you look at what was passed at this last session, and what we're going into now, because like COVID, the Maui fire will be forgotten as well. And this should have state support, this should have government support, county and state, as we move Hawaii towards this new age of climate change and sea rise. It would be a huge mistake tonight. I'm veering off course because I see Terry and Kim and Alicia. When you take a look at what happened in Maui, I would add Brandy and Tita and the lifeline that they threw shortly after. They had called and said, what do you need, what do you need, what do you need? This is, again, nonprofits, food banks. This should be a big piece of government. But they stepped in. We were buying everything we could. We haven't built anything. We're trying to figure this stuff out. We're on the fly. And I talked to Terry, who's pulling loads in from the mainland. I said, don't say no to anything. Say yes to everything. State County stood up Safeway. State County stood up Lowe's, and containers after containers after containers, because we wanted to say yes to everything while the getting's good. And we're filled, and Kim showing up and helping the volunteers, and the food banks kicking in, and Brandy at Maui Food Banks kicking in. And it was this, again, this was community, and it'll always be community first that can react quickly. But the state needs to step up. The legislature, the Senate, and the House need to step up, behave like adults, and get something done. I don't know how you stay in there for year after year after year, and for us to have these same meetings and the same comments coming from the same departments about what we plan on doing someday, and none of that stuff gets done. So hopefully our kuleana is to move and make sure that they know that it's their kuleana.
So what are some key things that can be done in the next 12 to 18 months while the getting's good, so to speak, for lack of a better term? What can the audience do? What can everyone in Hawaii do to make sure to keep that pressure on, to make sure that some change comes of this horrific disaster? Legislation
starts in a few months. That's one. Be active as you can be. I think that's one place to start.
And Dexter needs to be confirmed in this next
That's what I was trying to say, actually.
Okay.
No.
So just let your lawmaker know on the Senate side that Dexter needs to be confirmed. He's one of the brightest stars in our state, and has the heart and the will and the brains to get that done. So that'll be helpful.
Thank you.
I think, speaking for our city, we have a lot of work to do to rethink about wildfire and the threat that they pose. I think that there needs to be more investment statewide in prevention. That's very clear, and we're doing a number of things to look at the codes, the prevention measures, our communication about it across the city, and in addition to response. That's one thing, because I think even myself, who worries about everything all the time, thought about wildfire in terms of like, maybe it'll be 20 homes. I was not thinking like this, and I got to think like that now. We all do, and I think that's one thing. I think I just want to echo what Chad said, is we're looking, the ledge or whoever it is, at making investments over the next session. Time and again, whether it was COVID, whether it was this, whether there's any countless other disaster, I talked about whole of community. Whole of community really doesn't mean government-led, it means community-led. And we have got to be able to invest in the frontline NGOs that are doing this out there day in, day out, and to help them build capacity, because we put such a load on their shoulders when push comes to shove and asking them to do this. And to be able to invest in that. You know, the disaster brings out a magnifying glass to every problem that already exists. And this is going to siphon, you know, even if you look at just Oʻahu, like a lot of nonprofits, people are donating to Maui. It's going to create new challenges here as donors, you know, have extended themselves already. I think we really need to look at their role in emergency response and what can we build in so that doesn't become other duties at the last minute, but there's some actual capacity we built in and some flex in their system to respond to the, you know, frankly, they're doing emergency work every day. This is just, the volume goes up for them. So I think that's important.
I think supporting new lawmakers that are coming into office that want the change. When you see what happened firsthand in Mayor Bisson's case, I can tell you, I know him, I work with him, and I would follow him into any war. Because I see what he does and what he's made out of and the heart he has, and he's not a politician, and he stood up to do this. And I see someone who's standing up to do that, or somebody new at the Senate, or somebody new at the House, or somebody new running for county or whatever, that will stop him is, you know, what happened in Lahaina was decades in the making. Decades of poor decisions, decades of not investing. And because you look at the area that burned, it's clearly, that was completely preventable if we would have been taking care of our own. But you stand up for that, and you've been there for 9 months, and then that happens, and it's your head on a pike? They're coming in for the first time to try to drive change, to try to work through and work with the water systems and do the different things. And so I don't want to see someone discouraged who is amazing and would come in and make the right calls and make the right decisions, because they're like, listen, if I step in there, I'm going to get blamed for all the stuff that happened before me. And there's a ton of neglect that is before you, before today. And so I think encouraging the right people to stand up, to run for office, get moving in that direction, because the only way it's really going to change is either to hold them accountable or replace them with people that can actually do it.
Thank you. Thank you to the three of you, and unfortunately we've run out of time. I'm sure that we could converse all night, and I'm sure it would be welcome, but unfortunately we have to call it a day there. But I just want to say thank you to the three of you so very much for coming and sharing your expertise and your thoughts in the wake of this tragedy. And I think we can all agree it was a very fruitful discussion and much food for thought. So thank you again. I think they deserve a round of applause. And